Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we take the sources you send us and we try to synthesize the foundational, often brutal truths that govern success, failure, and, well, influence.
And today, we're taking a pretty dramatic step back. We're moving away from the day-to-day politics, the quarterly business reports,
Right.
and we're going straight to the source. We're analyzing the foundational, and I mean really brutal, mechanics of power itself.
That's right. And the sources we have today are incredibly focused. We're drawing primarily on some deep historical analysis of strategic and political moves. You know, the kind of timeless strategies that Robert Greene famously distilled into his laws of power.
And our mission here, just to be clear, it's not to judge these tactics.
No.
It's to synthesize the most shocking and, frankly, effective laws. We're talking about hierarchy, deception, psychological warfare. We want to give you, the listener, some actionable insights into these hidden rules that govern influence.
Rules that are operating all the time, whether you acknowledge them or not.
Exactly. They just are.
And here's the initial thesis that I think makes this deep dive so compelling. The sources, they all reveal that power is very often not earned through merit, not through hard work, not through objective talent. It's secured by mastering a deeply psychological game. A game of managing the insecurity, the envy, the vanity of those above you.
That's it right there. It's often less about your objective worth and, way more about how brilliantly you control the perceptions of other people.
It's a harsh truth.
It is. And that's where we're going to start, right there, with the fatal error that has undone just countless brilliant minds throughout history. It's the error of trying to look, well, too good.
Okay, so let's get right into it. Section 1, navigating the hierarchy. And this really kicks off with this crucial mechanism, Law 1, never outshine the master.
The core principle here is just, it's so fundamental. Every single person in a position of authority, and it doesn't matter if it's a king of France in the 1600s or your CEO tomorrow morning.
Or your political patron, yeah.
Any of them, they demand to feel comfortably superior in intelligence, in wit, in charm, in just overall capability. So if you're brilliant, you have to be really, really careful how you channel that brilliance.
Because if you don't, displaying your gifts too overtly, it doesn't get you a thank you. It doesn't earn you appreciation.
No, it inspires fear, massive insecurity, and an immediate, just visceral threat response.
Yeah.
The master, your boss, they might praise you in public.
Right. Great job on that presentation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But internally, they perceive your excellence as a direct challenge to their own preeminence. They might genuinely need your talent to succeed, but they also need to feel psychologically safe. And if you violate that sense of safety,
you're gone.
They will expend enormous energy to replace you. The moment they have a plausible pretext, you'll be out. And they'll bring in someone less intelligent, less attractive, someone less threatening.
And we see the ultimate, the textbook transgression of this law in the downfall of Nicolas Fouquet.
Oh, Fouquet.
He was Louis XIV's finance minister, mid-17th century. And Fouquet was, by all accounts, objectively indispensable. He was a financial wizard, hugely generous, and he absolutely loved the extravagant lifestyle.
He was the guy you wanted at a party.
I
He
did.
probably threw the best parties.
He did throw the best parties.
Yeah.
And he fully expected, when the prime minister died in 1661, that he would be the successor. It was the logical next step.
But Louis XIV, the Sun King, he had other plans. He just abolished the position entirely.
Gone.
Just poof, gone. Which was a clear sign that Fouquet was falling out of favor, regardless of how indispensable he thought he was. And this is where the psychological analysis in the sources really focuses. Fouquet's insecurity led him to double down on completely the wrong strategy.
He thought the solution was more spectacle.
More flattery, more lavishness. He thought he could overwhelm the king with this, this grand tribute.
And so he staged what the sources call the most spectacular party the world had ever seen. The occasion was ostensibly to commemorate the completion of his chateau, Vaux-le-Vicomte.
Which is, the irony is just dripping here.
Huh.
Louis XIV would later seize that very chateau and use it as the architectural inspiration for Versailles.
He basically stole the blueprint.
He stole the blueprint for the most famous palace in the world from the guy he was about to destroy. The scale of this overreach, you can't overstate it. This wasn't a modest get-together.
Yeah.
This was an event attended by the most influential nobility, the biggest cultural minds in France. He had La Fontaine there, Madame de Sévigné. Molière was commissioned to write a play just for the occasion, staged in the gardens.
And the dinner, I mean, the details are incredible. A 7-course affair. It featured new dishes and exotic foods from the Orient that had never been tasted in France before. It was all designed to show off Fouquet's global reach, his incredible wealth.
Everything, every single detail was designed to emphasize Fouquet's impeccable taste, his unbelievable resources, his total mastery of social staging. But the consequence was immediate. It was catastrophic, and it happened in real time, right there in front of the entire court.
Louis XIV walked away from that party not feeling flattered. He was consumed with rage.
Pure rage. Because the spectacle was so grand, so dazzling, that it made the king, his king, look comparatively meager. And worse, it made him look financially dependent on his own minister.
Which he was, but you're not supposed to point it out.
You're definitely not supposed to point it out at a massive party in front of everyone who matters. Louis famously declared he would hold Fouquet to account, not for his excellent service, but for the financial impropriety that must exist to fund such unparalleled luxury.
A convenient excuse.
The perfect excuse. The true reason, though, was clearly the king's mortally wounded vanity.
And this is the fate of all who unbalance the master's sense of self. Louis replaced the sparkling, unforgettable Fouquet with Jean-Baptiste Colbert, a man who the sources describe not just as bland, but as meticulously understated, utterly colorless in comparison.
Colbert's entire strategic value was that his lack of personal vanity completely reassured the king. He was safe. Fouquet spent the rest of his life in prison.
So the lesson is just cold. If you are more intelligent, more socially charming, more gifted than your master, you have to seem the opposite.
You have to commit, harmless little mistakes. Give the master a chance to appear superior. Let them correct you. Let them bestow the gift of their expertise or insight upon you. It reinforces their authority.
Now contrast that spectacular misstep with an example of just pure strategic brilliance applied to the exact same law. Galileo.
Ah, yes. Galileo's astrological submission to the Medicis.
In the early 1600s, Galileo was a genius astronomer, we all know that. But he was perpetually insecure. He was totally dependent on patronage.
He was in a constant state of, financial precarity. He was often paid in unreliable gifts, not cash, so he was forced to beg and scramble just to survive. He realized that talent alone was never going to buy him security. He needed a secure position. He needed a full, dependable salary.
What the sources called the coup of a lifetime.
Exactly. And he found his opportunity in 1610. He discovers the 4 largest moons orbiting the planet Jupiter. Now, crucially, instead of dedicating this discovery to a bunch of different noble families, which was the standard practice.
Right, you'd spread the love around.
You'd spread the love. He didn't. He focused exclusively and strategically on the reigning dynasty of Tuscany, the Medicis. So why them specifically?
Well, this is the brilliant part. Shortly after Cosimo I established the dynasty back in the 1540s, Jupiter, the mightiest of all the Roman gods, had been adopted as the official Medici symbol.
So Galileo realized he wasn't just presenting a scientific discovery, he was presenting a cosmic validation of their entire power structure. He was saying, look, even the heavens agree that you are destined to rule.
The flattery was, it was literally cosmic. He immediately announced that the 4 newly discovered moons, which he named the Sidera Medicia, the Medici stars, they harmonize precisely with the 4 sons of the current Duke, Cosimo II.
And not just that. He claimed these stars revolved around Jupiter, which symbolized the way the suns revolved around the dynasty's founder, Cosimo I. It was a perfect heavenly metaphor for their family's power.
He literally aligned the Medicis with the stars. He commissioned an emblem showing Jupiter on a cloud with the 4 stars circling him. In one single stroke, Galileo gained more security and patronage than he had in years of scrambling.
Because he didn't challenge their intellectual authority. He projected their glory into the heavens. Cosimo II made him his official court philosopher and mathematician with a full salary and a position for life.
He understood the crucial difference. Don't outshine the master. Make the master outshine all others. The key difference between Galileo and Fouquet, it wasn't competence. They were both brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. It was the strategic control of perception. That's it.
Precisely. And speaking of controlling perceptions, especially perceptions of loyalty, that brings us right to law 2. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies.
This is one of the most cynical, but also one of the most often vindicated laws of power.
Yeah.
It feels wrong.
It feels wildly counterintuitive. I mean, in any professional context, we're taught to rely on trust, on shared history. So why do the sources insist that friends are fundamentally dangerous in a hierarchy?
Well, friends are easily aroused to envy. They feel they have a license to judge your success because they knew you when. They know your weaknesses, and they can feel entitled to your attention and, by extension, to a piece of your success.
And there's another layer to it. If they become dependent on you, the sources suggest that the debt of gratitude can become this unbearable burden.
Exactly. They might become spoiled and tyrannical. Or, even worse, they might turn on you because, psychologically, they need to destroy the source of that charity you in order to feel truly independent and powerful in their own right.
Whereas a former enemy, if you hire them, they often have far more to prove. They're deeply invested in demonstrating their loyalty because they have a reputation to rebuild, and they have no history of entitlement toward you.
And we see the most spectacular, the most bloody transgression of this law in the 9th century Byzantine Empire, the story of Emperor Michael III and his best friend, Basilius.
Michael III was young, he was inexperienced, and he was deeply paranoid about all the intriguers surrounding the throne. So he felt he needed someone utterly trustworthy as his counselor, and his mind immediately went to Basilius, his best friend and the head of the royal stables.
A groom. A horse groom. He ignored all counsel to appoint the qualified general, a man named Bardas, who had actually helped Michael secure the throne in the first place.
Instead, he just stacked Basilius's position. He loaded him with extravagant gifts, sent him to the finest schools, doubled and then tripled his salary multiple times.
And this is the wildest part. He even married Basilius to his own mistress, Eudoxia in Greene, all in a desperate attempt to buy and secure his friend's satisfaction and loyalty.
But all he did was subsidize Basilius's ambition. Basilius's unchecked hunger for power, it just grew exponentially. He started pouring poison into Michael's ear, convincing him that his uncle Bardas, the general, the genuinely talented man,
Was dangerously ambitious and needed to be removed.
The sources recount this chilling detail. Michael eventually agreed to have Bardas murdered during a great horse race.
And Basilius himself led the assassination, stabbed his rival to death, and took his position as head of the army. That transition from stable boy to general, that's the moment the power dynamics fundamentally flipped.
Basilius had now seen power up close. His wealth, his political connections, his influence were now comparable to the emperor's. So Michael, who's facing his own financial constraints, eventually had the temerity to ask Basilius to repay some of the enormous sums he had borrowed over the years.
And the sources state Basilius just refused. Refused with a look of shocking impudence. And in that moment, Michael's deadly error became crystal clear. The former stable boy now had more money, more allies, and more power than the emperor himself.
He had staked his entire future on the most unreliable currency in the realm of power: personal gratitude.
And weeks later, Basilius orchestrated Michael's murder after a night of heavy drinking and proclaimed himself emperor. He then rode through Byzantium, brandishing the former emperor's head on a pike. Michael died because he valued sentiment friendship over strategic necessity, loyalty that needed to be earned.
That sets us up perfectly for the ultimate countermeasure to Michael's mistake, which is Law 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. If gratitude is a burden that leads to betrayal.
Then permanent, necessary dependency is the key to maintain loyalty.
The core strategy here is to establish your value, but then to strategically manipulate your presence. To maintain your freedom and power, you must never allow others to become so familiar with your services that they just take you for granted.
Right. Withdrawal is a necessary tactic. It increases your perceived value. Scarcity.
And the classic illustration of this mechanism is the strategy of Deioces of Media. His land was plagued by violent anarchy. Deioces was a simple man, but he slowly built this legendary reputation as an impeccable, fair judge, an arbiter. He handled every legal conflict flawlessly, while the existing courts just fell into complete disrepute.
He became the sole source of justice in a land that was drowning in chaos. Then, at the absolute height of his power and influence, he retired, abruptly.
And his stated complaint was simple. He said he neglected his own affairs. He couldn't be expected to run the whole society for free.
The consequence was immediate. It was predictable. The country descended into exponentially greater chaos and lawlessness because the one source of order was gone. The anarchy he had tamed came back with a vengeance, exactly as he knew it would.
The people, unable to live under the violence and disorder, they begged him to return, not as a judge, but to rule as their king.
And Deioces agreed. But he imposed these extreme conditions that would cement his power forever and make him utterly inaccessible.
He demanded an enormous, impenetrable palace, massive bodyguards, a new capital city, and crucially, admission to his presence was strictly forbidden. Communication was only allowed through messengers.
He implemented these conditions because he understood a key psychological principle. If no one saw him habitually, the legend would grow. He wouldn't just be a man anymore, he would be a being of a different order entirely. This strategic absence turned mere respect for his judicial skill into true worship. It ensured his continued dependency and stability.
And he established the foundations for the powerful Persian Empire and ruled for 53 years, all because he mastered dependency through calculated absence and mystique.
What's so fascinating here is that dependency, and really all of these laws, require the constant masking of true intent. Which brings us to our next major theme, the art of deception.
Okay, so let's move into section 2, the art of deception, and we start with law 3. Conceal your intentions. The strategic judgment here is pretty clear. Keep people off balance and in the dark.
Right, because if they have no clue what you're ultimately trying to achieve, they cannot prepare a rational defense. They can't form a counter strategy. Your goal is to guide them far enough down the wrong path or envelop them in so much smoke that by the time they realize your real goal, it's already way too late to stop you.
So part A of this strategy is the political pivot, using a decoyed object of desire. And there is no better historical master of this than Otto von Bismarck.
Bismarck is the master. In 1850, war fever was sky high in Prussia. Everyone wanted to go to war against Austria, who was keeping Germany weak and fragmented. Prince William favored war, and Bismarck himself was this passionate, almost fanatical supporter of Prussian might. He dreamed of unifying Germany through iron and blood.
That was his phrase. Yet at the height of this war fever, Bismarck gives this astonishing public speech opposing war.
Completely against type, he praises Austria, he defends their sovereignty, and he delivers this solemn, detailed warning about the devastating cost of war to the peasant, the crippled, the bereaved father. It was entirely contrary to his known private political ambition.
So what was he doing?
He was operating on these dual, brilliant calculations. First, he was deeply pragmatic. He sensed the Prussian military at that moment was just not ready for war, and losing would completely jeopardize his political career before it had really begun.
Okay, that makes sense.
But second, and this is more important, he knew the king was currently leaning toward peace. And what Bismarck wanted, more than war right then, was positional power.
So the answer was strategic misdirection. Throw everyone off the scent by supporting a cause he privately detested. By aligning himself with the king's immediate desire for peace, he successfully disguised his long-term intention, which was to unify Germany through force.
And the immediate result was phenomenal. The king, so grateful for Bismarck's surprising peace stance, immediately made him a cabinet minister. And then years later, when the timing was right, when the military readiness was perfect, Bismarck did lead Prussia into war against Austria. He crushed them. And he established the mighty German state he always intended to.
He used peace as a decoy to gain the power necessary for his real long-term war goals.
Precisely.
And then we have part B of this law, which is the use of the smokescreen to distract from the trap itself. This is perfectly exemplified by the legendary con man Joseph Weil, known as the Yellow Kid.
Ah, the Yellow Kid. The victim here was a man named Sam Giesel, a millionaire, semi-retired, and critically, as the sources note, itching for a deal and an adventure.
He was bored. He was looking for a thrill.
He was the perfect mark. So the Yellow Kid establishes this massive smokescreen. He approaches Giesel with an idea: buy a hunting lodge for cheap. And the story was that an imagined Secretary Weil's uncle held a personal grudge against the wealthy financiers who owned it and wanted to sell it at a loss, just to spite them.
So the entire focus is on this deal, an offer of large profit plus a little adventure. Giesel's mind became completely absorbed with the details of this pending sale.
And that absorption in the high-stakes decoy meant he missed all the red flags of the true trap, which was the staged boxing match.
Right, this was just presented as a fun little side bet.
Exactly. Weil introduced this seemingly incidental bout between his fighter, a man named Gross, who was deliberately unimpressive, gray-haired, beer-bellied.
Looks like a total loser.
Right. And the financier's man, Giesel, convinced he was already about to make a huge profit on the lodge, eagerly put up his own $35,000 in cash for the rigged bet. He was certain he was already playing with house money.
And the climax was just meticulously engineered terror. Gross died mid-fight, he collapsed, and he used a small ball of chicken blood and hot water hidden in his cheek to simulate a fatal injury.
So Giesel, who thought he was just involved in a low-risk financial venture, is suddenly convinced he's an accomplice in a murder conspiracy.
Terrified, he fled immediately. He abandoned the money, which now seemed to him a small price to pay to avoid being implicated in a crime.
And the smokescreen, the profitable lodge sale, successfully diverted Giesel's attention and his critical thinking until the murder scam was sprung. He forgot all about the money the second he feared for his own freedom. The psychological power of the smokescreen is that it hides your true intentions behind something comfortable and familiar.
You lead the sucker down a familiar path, the prospect of a profitable deal, and he'll walk right into the trap because he's too preoccupied with the decoy profit to question the logistics of the main event.
And that preoccupation with one's own perceived intelligence, that's the key, which moves us to Law 21. Play a sucker to catch a sucker. This is the ultimate sucker tactic because it relies entirely on the victim's vanity.
The goal is to make your marks feel smart, smarter than you are.
Much smarter. Once they're convinced they hold the intellectual or positional high ground, they will never suspect that the seeming simpleton standing before them has any ulterior motives at all.
And we see this principle just flawlessly executed in the infamous diamond mine scam pulled off by two men, Arnold and Slack.
These guys were gold miners, and they deliberately presented themselves as utterly naive rubes and hayseeds. They wore ill-fitting, cheap clothes. They acted completely incredulous about the high society world of New York. They just gave off this impression of being simpletons who had accidentally stumbled onto a fortune.
And the Marks, they were the absolute elite of the financial world. You had Ralston, the owner of the Bank of California, Harpending, a major financier, and Charles Tiffany.
Charles Tiffany, the famed jeweler.
The miners' ruse was simple, but it demanded this meticulous setup. Months before they even showed up in New York, they had traveled to Europe. They'd bought $12,000 worth of real gems, diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and they secretly salted a remote mine site out in the American West.
So when Tiffany and other esteemed experts examined the small sample of gems the hayseeds brought back, they confirmed they were 100% real. They estimated the value of the full sample alone at $1.5 million.
So the financiers and the jewelers, they just got swept up in the fever. And they were so utterly convinced of the miners' simplicity, this feeling that they were dealing with men far beneath their own intellectual station, that they grossly overestimated the mine's eventual value. They believed they had stumbled onto the richest field in mining history.
And here's where the vanity weaponized Law 21. The financiers, believing they were these sophisticated city slickers about to fleece two simple prospectors, they downplayed the mine's value to the stupid miners. They insisted, "Oh, you'll be ruined by unscrupulous tycoons if you hold on to your shares. You should sell to us.
Let us protect you from yourselves." And they offered to buy them out cheaply for a massive-sounding but ultimately low sum of $700,000.
And Arnold and Slack, they happily took the massive payout, relinquished the rights, the maps, the entire venture. The deception relied entirely on the perceived stupidity of the prospectors.
And the financiers then raised $10 million from eager investors, only to ruin themselves when they discovered the fake salted mine. They were fooled not by bad science or fake gems, but by their own intellectual arrogance.
And the prospectors' masterful facade of incompetence.
So if that last law dealt with intellectual confidence, Law 7 deals with intellectual labor. Get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit.
The idea here is to use the knowledge, the labor, the creativity of others to further your own cause. The goal is efficiency, because your helpers will often be forgotten, and you will attain what the sources call a godlike aura of efficiency.
This law carries a really tragic weight when you apply it to the history of science, particularly the rivalry between Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison.
Oh, Tesla. He was a brilliant, meticulous Serbian scientist hired by Edison in New York, and he often worked 18-hour days for his very demanding employer.
So Edison offers Tesla this massive incentive, $50,000, which was a colossal sum at the time, to completely redesign his primitive direct current, or DC, dynamos.
And Tesla succeeds in 1 year. He creates a vastly improved version with automatic controls that drastically increased efficiency. It was a huge breakthrough.
But when Tesla requested the promised payment, Edison famously replied, "Tesla, you don't understand our American humor," and offered a small raise instead.
That's just brutal. Edison was a businessman. He was an industrialist and a master publicist, first and foremost. Tesla was a purely scientific thinker who just naively believed in meritocracy.
And Tesla's misfortune just continued when he struck out on his own. He developed the alternating current, the AC system, the standard we still use globally today, and he was funded by George Westinghouse. Westinghouse offered a seemingly generous royalty agreement based on the power generated.
But the AC/DC current wars were intensely public and political. Other scientists and engineers came forward claiming credit, and the public, they associated the invention primarily with Westinghouse, who was the face of the massive industrial rollout.
Not Tesla.
Not Tesla, who was preoccupied with the complex mathematics of the system itself.
And the theft of credit, it culminated in financial ruin. J.P. Morgan, sensing an opportunity to dismantle Westinghouse's control over the new power grid, forced Westinghouse to rescind the royalty contract.
And Tesla, financially exhausted and maybe seeing the pure science as more important than the money, was persuaded to accept a quick buyout of his patents for $216,000.
Which was a catastrophic mistake. Those patents were realistically worth well over $12 million.
And the theft continued even after his death. Guglielmo Marconi is universally linked with the invention of radio, yet his seminal 1899 transatlantic broadcast relied entirely on fundamental patents that Tesla had filed back in 1897.
So Tesla received no money and no credit for his work on the AC system, the induction motor, or for being essentially the real father of radio. He died in poverty and obscurity.
The analysis here is just chilling. Tesla was ruined because he believed science was beyond petty rivalries. He tried to do everything on his own, exhausting and impoverishing himself by focusing only on the creation.
While Edison and others, conversely, they hired the best people and then ruthlessly secured the credit for themselves and their reputation. The key takeaway for you, the listener, is twofold. First, you have to secure the credit and be vigilant.
And second, you have to recognize that the political reality demands you seize and synthesize the work others have done, not just your own, to solidify your perceived godlike efficiency.
Now, we're going to shift gears entirely. We're moving from the transactional manipulation of power, the cons, and the credit grabs, to the high-level psychological strategies used to defeat superior opponents by manipulating the very concept of certainty.
That's right. This final section looks at the use of psychological posture, movement, and perception to create a strategic advantage that goes way beyond individual deception. It's about manipulating expectations at the grandest scale, whether that's on a chessboard or a global battlefield.
And we start with Law 17, cultivate an air of unpredictability. The thinking here is that humans crave familiarity. We crave routine in other people. Predictability gives us a sense of control and safety.
Therefore, intentional inconsistency, radical shifts in behavior, a lack of any discernible purpose. All of this keeps opponents off balance. It exhausts them as they waste energy trying to decipher and explain your moves.
We see this masterfully deployed in the 1972 Chess World Championship showdown. American prodigy Bobby Fischer versus the Russian reigning champion, Boris Spassky.
And Spassky represented the highly disciplined, calm, and deeply predictable strategic style of the Soviet school of chess. He often defeated Fischer precisely because he could read his opponent's classical patterns. He knew what Fischer was going to do.
So Fischer responded with pure weaponized chaos. He arrived late for games. He threatened to cancel the whole match. He complained constantly about every single environmental detail. The hall, the lighting, the cameras, the chairs.
This was psychological warfare. He was unnerving Spassky before the match had even properly begun.
And then came the games themselves. Fischer played unorthodox, risky, and sometimes just seemingly terrible moves. He made what appeared to be a deliberate blunder in Game 1, and then he forfeited Game 2 entirely.
Which put him down 2-0. In championship chess, that kind of deficit was considered insurmountable. Spassky, unable to recognize any pattern, was completely shocked when Fischer checkmated him in Game 3 using an unexpected non-classical move.
And the psychological toll that this chaos exacted was profound. Spassky, a man known for his level-headedness and his iron nerves, started making blunders that were just uncharacteristic of a world champion. After losing Game 6, he actually started to cry during play.
And after Game 8, he called a staff conference, and he announced, "An attempt is being made to control my mind."
He was so unmoored by Fischer's inconsistency that he became convinced he was being hypnotized, or that Fischer's team had planted chemicals in the chairs to disorient him.
Which hilariously sent the KGB on high alert. They ordered the immediate X-ray of all the furniture.
Spassky's mind just completely unraveled. He lost his fundamental ability to figure out his opponent. Fischer won by destroying Spassky's capacity to predict his strategy. He forced the Russian champion to abandon his own reliable, disciplined style and just melt down under the pressure of pervasive uncertainty.
Fischer's chaos put the initiative entirely on his side of the board.
Now, the tragic flip side of cultivating external movement and engagement is Law 18, Isolation is dangerous. Do not build mental or physical fortresses.
Right. The moment you retreat and cut yourself off, you lose vital information, you lose a sense of proportion, and you leave yourself completely vulnerable to plots from within your own circle.
And the sources make a critical distinction here. The fortress, whether it's a physical palace or a self-imposed mental bubble, it promises security, but what it delivers is terminal vulnerability.
You lose your ear. You lose your connection to what is actually happening in the complex world around you, which is exactly where your enemies are operating.
The cautionary tale here is Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. After he successfully unified China, he ruled through extreme centralized paranoia. He outlawed Confucianism, he burned thousands of books, he executed those who dared to quote the philosophers.
And all of this generated constant fear, which in turn just amplified his own deep paranoia.
And as his fear grew, he withdrew deeper and deeper into a physical fortress. He built this magnificent, sprawling palace in Jianyang with over 270 pavilions connected by a bewildering web of secret underground passageways. It was all designed so no one could ever know where he was or where he was going.
He slept in a different room every night, and the standing order was that anyone who inadvertently laid eyes on him was to be instantly beheaded.
The isolation was total, and the consequences were terminal. As he withdrew deeper, he lost all effective control of the realm. Ministers and powerful eunuchs began enacting political policies and administrative decisions without his knowledge.
They were actively plotting against him, knowing he could no longer effectively monitor their actions from his inaccessible fortress.
And the emperor died alone while traveling incognito, far from his family. His death was immediately covered up by the scheming ministers, who feared their plots would be exposed if his death became public too soon.
His body had to be transported back to the capital with a cart of salted fish trailing behind it for weeks just to cover the stench of the rotting corpse.
He was likely poisoned by the very ministers who had encouraged his withdrawal in the first place. His physical fortress ensured he was protected from physical assault, but it guaranteed his political and strategic death. He became emperor in name only.
It's a perfect illustration that retreating into isolation means you lose the essential, dynamic knowledge on which your life and your power depend. You only survive if you are constantly in the field, engaged, and receiving real-time information.
Which brings us to the supreme strategy for winning against superior forces in large-scale conflict. Law 48, assume formlessness.
Right. By committing to a visible plan, a shape, or an entrenched position, you become a static target. You become open to attack. The powerful must be fluid, adaptable, and constantly on the move, like water. Never bet on stability or lasting order.
And this concept is so crucial because it's a direct contrast to traditional Western Clausewitzian warfare, which is based on concentrating superior force on a fixed position to achieve a decisive head-on victory.
We see the strategic superiority of formlessness demonstrated perfectly in the post-World War II Chinese Civil War. It pitted Chiang Kai-shek's technologically superior nationalists against Mao Zedong's weaker communists.
Chiang Kai-shek, who was trained in Western strategic models, concentrated his best forces to take and hold major cities in Manchuria. He believed that by occupying fixed positions, he could crush the communists through superior firepower and mass.
But Mao, conversely, was heavily influenced by the ancient Chinese game of Go, or Wei He. And Go is nonlinear. It's subtle. It prioritizes encircling the enemy and building influence over space rather than rushing to seize fixed points.
So the communists dispersed. They went to remote, out-of-the-way areas. They never linked up their forces. They would seize towns only to give them up weeks later. The sources call them elusive and formless. They moved like a constantly shifting fog.
Chiang's fatal mistake was focusing on the position, the cities. Mao used the immense, seemingly useless rural space to surround the cities indirectly. So if Chiang attempted to move a large army to reinforce a besieged city,
the communists would just encircle the rescuing army. They would break the nationalist forces into these isolated, demoralized units with their supply lines cut.
the strategy of Wei Qi prioritizes mobility and adaptability over entrenched positions. The aim is not to kill off the opponent's pieces directly. It's to induce a collapse by constantly changing shape, creating paralysis, and surrounding them indirectly.
Formlessness disoriented the superior enemy. It forced them to waste enormous resources pursuing what was essentially a vaporous army, and ultimately it allowed Mao to win indirectly by creating a collapse of morale and supply chains.
It's the ultimate form of strategic judo. When direct engagement is too costly, Indirectness and elusiveness yield devastating results.
Yeah.
You make the opponent exhaust themselves chasing your ghost.
So let's try to synthesize these 10 powerful and, I mean, undeniably ruthless laws for you, the learner. We've analyzed how power is achieved not by virtue or raw merit, but by mastering the subtle art of psychological warfare and strategic positioning.
And this mastery involves securing your position by making your masters feel psychologically secure, like Galileo did. It involves using calculated cynicism by leveraging enemies over friends, like the tragedy of Dacilius shows us. And it involves ruthlessly ensuring you take the public credit for collective labor, like Edison did over Tesla.
It also means employing masterful deception, concealing your ultimate goals behind convincing decoys, like Bismarck, and lulling your marks into arrogance by playing the fool, like in the diamond scam.
And finally, success requires strategic posturing, maintaining a terrifying air of chaos and unpredictability like Bobby Fischer, while avoiding the informational death trap of isolation like Qin Shi Huangdi, and always preferring adaptable, formless strategies over fixed positions, like Mao.
The underlying foundational theme that's woven through every single one of these case studies, from the most intimate court intrigue to the grandest military maneuver, is the necessity of controlling perception.
That is the whole game. Whether it was Fouquet projecting too much wealth and falling from grace, or DIOCs projecting necessary absence and rising to the level of worship, the image projected determined the outcome far more than their actual objective capabilities. Power is fundamentally a performance.
And the structure of that performance has to align with the insecurities of your audience.
Absolutely.
And maybe the most dangerous weakness to possess is the belief that life has fundamentally changed since the days of Louis XIV, or that raw talent and just being authentic are sufficient defenses. The sources suggest otherwise. They suggest that the human ego, with all its vulnerabilities to flattery, envy, and the fear of the unknown, it remains the single greatest driver of success and failure in the high-stakes game of influence.
We often equate sincerity and honesty with safety and security, but in the realm of power, they are simply vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited.
Which leaves us with the final provocative thought for you to consider. If your safety and success rely entirely on managing the envy and insecurity of those above you, what law are you inadvertently violating right now? Simply by trying to excel or just be yourself?
And how much of your perceived worth in your job, your career, your social sphere is simply the result of successfully controlling the narrative? And what happens the moment you relinquish that control?
Because if you're not actively controlling the narrative around your competence and your intentions, someone else is shaping it for you.
And likely not in your favor. That's definitely something worth mulling over until our next deep dive.
We'll see you then.